sleep divorce is where you will sleep either in separate locations or at least in separate beds. Mm-hmm. The diluted version of the sleep divorce, rather than sleeping in separate rooms and separate beds, is called the Scandinavian method, which you think sounds so much more salacious than it actually is, which is essentially you've just got two separate beds that you put side by side, and that's the diet version of a sleep divorce. But I do think that sleep divorce idea is important because it is a taboo, and it also can markedly improve things for people. So when we've looked at survey data, both in the US and also in the UK with the Sleep Council there, what you find is that about 1 out of every 4 couples who are surveyed will tell you that they have had a sleep divorce, that they will sleep in separate beds. And we think that that may be in part an underestimate because of the stigma associated with it. And if you survey people anonymously, you get to a number of almost 1 out of every 3 people will admit to waking up at least in different locations. And there is pretty good evidence from the science as to why that number may make sense. Why 25% of all couples suggest that. When we study couples who are sleeping together, objectively on almost every measure that we can quantify about sleep, sleep is worse when you're sleeping as a couple relative to when you're sleeping separately. The twist in the tail there, though, is that when you ask people about their satisfaction of sleep, there is definitely some group of individuals that say, look, I feel more satisfied with my sleep when I'm sleeping with my partner than when I'm sleeping separately, despite the fact that objectively their sleep is worse. So I'm not suggesting it's a one-size-fits-all, but I think the taboo comes from the idea that, well, if you're not sleeping together, then you're not sleeping together. And the exact
That's British
opposite.
for having intercourse? Is that what it is?
Thank you very much, yeah. Can we just get over this? It's my desperately unfortunate Hugh Grant genes that has me sort of trying to navigate around the topic rather than just saying it straight. So thank you, Tim. Yes, if you're not sleeping together, then you're not having sex. You're not having intercourse.
Yes.
But oh, come on, Matthew, hold it together. But it turns out that the opposite is true, that when you get a couple who are sleeping well, their sex life actually improves. And it's probably for 3 reasons that we've uncovered. The first is hormones. The second is sensitivity. And the third is libido. And I'll try to park my Hugh Grant and get right into it. In terms of the hormones...
Take off the gloves, Matt.
Yeah,
Take off the gloves.
Come on, it's time. I'm wondering what you mean by saying take off the glove in terms of this conversation, but let me just skip it. You see, you opened the door, Tim, and I walked right through.
Here we go. Or put on the gloves, if you prefer.
Yes, yeah, I think probably best, but we know each other quite well now, so maybe. Anyway, in terms of the hormones, firstly, we know that testosterone, gosh, it takes a pretty sharp nosedive in males and in females when you're not sleeping well. Mm-hmm. Males who, if we put them on a diet of maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep, they drop their levels of testosterone somewhere by about 10 years of aging. So a lack of sleep will age a man by a decade in terms of virility. It's also true of estrogen in women. And so when those 2 sex hormones are not in play, you get a reduction in the quality of the sex life. The second component, and this is data that we've only really got in females, less so in males, but the sensitivity of female genitalia increases when sleep is in high volume versus when people are not getting sufficient sleep. And we think that's due to the estrogen, that when estrogen is in normative amounts because you're sleeping well, there is greater vaginal lubrication, which therefore leads to greater sensitivity and greater pleasure by way of sex. And then the final aspect is libido. We've also found that when a woman obtains an extra 1 hour of sleep, there is a 14% increase in her desirability to be intimate, to have sex with her partner. And I find that interesting because if you put it in context, the FDA-approved drugs for increased libido in women, things like, I think it's called Vyleesi is one of them, I know, that will increase libido in women by about 24%. But here is the simple addition of 1 hour of extra sleep. You can get more than 50% of that benefit drug-free.
Question for you, Matt. How are these drug companies measuring increases in libido? Is it a self-reported 1 to 10 scale or something like that, which can be very fungible?
It's self-reported. So many of those scales are subjective. It's very much like pain, that when it comes to libido, it's somewhat difficult to quantify. And of course, it's not just about innate biological libido. The conditions have to be right. You have to have the relationship with your partner. Which actually also reminds me, by the way, when couples are not sleeping well, and this is a study from UC Berkeley, not from my lab, but what they found is that they have more fights. They don't resolve conflict nearly as well between them when they're having a fight. And the reason is because you lose empathy. When you're not sleeping well, your ability to empathize with other individuals, and we now have demonstrated why in terms of the brain networks, you decrease that capacity for understanding the other. And no wonder you're fighting, and you're fighting in a pretty poor way.
So what's the playbook? What's the best practices?
Good question. I think I'm not suggesting that a sleep divorce is for everyone by any means whatsoever. There are some people for whom they adore sleeping with their partner for lots of reasons: safety, security, intimacy. But I think if you are interested in it, take a graded approach. And I would suggest, firstly, just having an open, gentle conversation, and don't be defensive about it. The second is, don't suggest that it's permanent. Offer the idea that, look, could we do this? Darling, could we do this for the next week or the next 2 weeks? And I'm not suggesting it's forever. Let's just see, and let's just try it on for size. Then I think what people misunderstand about sleeping together in the same bed is what they miss. They don't really miss the majority of time, because for the majority of time you're asleep and you're non-conscious. What you really miss are the bookends of sleep. That sort of getting into bed, having a cuddle, saying a good night, and in the morning waking up and doing the same thing. So if you have a sleep divorce, what you can also do is build that in. So, whoever goes to bed first, the other person comes in, you have your time, you sort of cuddle, do whatever you need to do, and then you leave, and then you repeat the same process in the morning. You don't have to do that every day, of course. It's not going to be practical. But in that way, you sort of get the benefits of sleeping together whilst still having a sleep divorce, if that makes some sense. So I would just say, be honest with yourself.
I feel like sleep divorce needs a rebrand. Maybe furniture polyamory, since you'd be on separate pieces of furniture. Sounds really sort of risque, taboo, kind of sexy.
I am so stealing that, because when you bring that up at a dinner conversation and you finally admit it to your friends, they all think, oh no, they're on the rocks, But furniture polyamory, all sorts of, swings from the ceiling and...
Oh, it sounds very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, candle wax on the nipples. Let's go.
They're killing it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.